All right, we're going to be going through a 1975 Suzuki GT500 carburetor, and this is a dual carb setup. We're going to go through the left-hand carburetor first, and then I'll walk you through the right-hand carburetor. We're going to rebuild it, clean it up, and get it ready to go to put on that bike. It's a two-stroke motorcycle, and this choke assembly here runs all the way through to the other carburetor. So you want to make sure that this goes in and out there, and make sure it sits in position. When you choke it, which is pushing this lever down, it should stay open there. Now the next thing, got your idle adjust on this side, and that is just simply a turn screw, and you can see when you turn it, it opens this slide up a little bit more. So you want to make sure your motorcycle is extremely warm before you start adjusting this. You just want to get it to operating temperature before you do any kind of idle adjustment. Also, you want to make sure your choke is off. Best way to clean a carburetor is to pull it off of the motorcycle completely. That way you can look through it, inspect everything, and make sure that it's clean before going back together. We've got the top cap here. Your throttle cable runs down into this cap here. And obviously, since we've already pulled off the motorcycle and pulled that throttle cable off, the cable's not going to be inside, but that cable just runs in there. You can pull this cap, and what's going to happen when you pull the cap, when the cable is still attached, this cable, slide, spring, and needle are all going to come up together. Now, since obviously the cable isn't attached, that's not going to be the case, but the cable is going to run right down in the middle of this spring here. It's also going to run right down into the middle of this slide, and it'll pull out just like that, and you've got a holder here. Now, what I do then is take a small pair of pliers, small pair of needle nose pliers, pull the cable up as far as it can go, or excuse me, pull the spring up as far as it can go. So it's gonna look something like this, and I'm gonna take that spring, kind of pull it up like this, and then with my other hand, you take a needle nose pliers and pull up on this keeper. And I'm just gonna move all this just so you can see, but you gotta pull up on this keeper here, and then that's gonna allow that cable to slide out of that groove right down in the middle there and pull everything out. Now your spring, your keeper, and your cap here are all going to come out separate from your cable then at that point. So you don't actually have to do, unless you're taking this needle out, you don't actually have to do anything with these small Phillips screws in the bottom of this slide here. Now if you're wanting to remove this needle to replace it, a lot of carb kits will come with this needle. You will have to pull these two Phillips screws. They're very small, but generally where they're sitting, not a lot of debris, water, bad fuel or anything is going to be sitting on top of here, so a lot of times these screws are fairly easy to come out. Now we've got that stuff pulled off there. I'm going to set that aside, and I'm going to go ahead and pull this choke assembly. It takes a 12mm wrench, and once you get it loosened, a lot of times you can just take your fingers there and just undo this nut here. It's this nut is the cap of the choke, and your handle and everything will come off together on this one. And then once you loosen it up here, your plunger along with the entire assembly will just slide out together. That's a pretty easy setup. Sometimes there's got a cable running down through there on other models. Just makes it a little more challenging. This one's just got the plunger there. Now you want to make sure you take and blow compressed air through there. Make sure you blow Carb&Choke cleaner. I prefer this Gum-Out brand, the Carb&Choke cleaner, and that is one of the best carb cleaners that I've found to use. You can also see why we have that top cap off. When we turn this idle screw, that bolt going in and out there, pushing that slide up. I'll make one more note here. When you are adjusting your idle, what that is doing is pushing on this spot right here, pushing this slide up. So if you're turning your idle down, it's going to lower that slide, allowing less airflow to through there, sucking more fuel from that bottom bowl. Now that we've got that off, this carburetor will sit there, no problem, and that way it doesn't tip over. You're not having to fight it. One more note here before we take this bottom bowl off. If you're just wanting to drain the fuel out of your carburetor for the year, or if you're going back together and you want to put fuel in there, make sure you've got fuel running through there. You can take this cap here, and it only takes a couple turns, and fuel will start to dump out of the bottom of this carburetor here. Another note, you want to make sure that there's a hose on this nipple here going underneath of the motor of the motorcycle, because that fuel bouncing around and dumping on that motor could potentially start a fire, or it could discolor your motor. So 4 Phillips screws here. Now a lot of times these are a little bit of a challenge to get off. If they are, you can use vice grips, but I suggest a good quality screwdriver, and most of the time you won't have a problem with these. Now if you do have a problem, a lot of times getting them back on is a whole lot easier. So sometimes if I have a problem, what I'll do is snug it up a little bit more, and that'll just give me, it'll just allow me to be able to break that screw loose a little bit easier if you tighten it up slightly and then untighten it. Otherwise, you can get these screws. They're not very expensive. If any dealership probably has a couple of them laying around. Most carburetors, I'd say 99% of carburetors have these same sized bowl screws, and so they're pretty universal. All the metrics anyways. So those 4 screws are out. Now a lot of times, because of the gasket that's sitting under this bowl, it's a little bit of a challenge to get this bowl off just by pulling it off. A lot of times you take it, just tap on it like that, you can just lift that bowl right off. This one's got some white debris down in here. Now we've soaked this carburetor, cleaned it up best as we could, but it could use maybe a sonic cleaner or potentially another soak. A lot of this will stay attached on there. You really have to scrape it to get it off, and it is possible to come off of there maybe with an ultrasonic cleaner where it's pushing fluid around, constantly moving. I bet you'd clean this up really good. We don't use one of those here. A lot of times we can get it clean with Carb&Choke cleaner. Your bike will run in the condition that this is here. Same goes for this part of it here. A lot of white corrosion here, and it has eaten away some of this metal, but we've cleaned it up really good and shouldn't cause any issues. We've got your main jet here. It sits right in the middle. I'll try to move my hand there, get out of your way, and you've got a washer underneath of it. This main jet, depending on altitude, riding conditions, performance done to the bike, you can switch out this main jet and your pilot jet to allow more or less fuel flow through there. Now, this main jet here rides right up to the center where this needle sits. So when you twist your throttle, your slide's gonna go up, you're gonna allow more fuel through. Now, if you take this main jet completely out, you twist the throttle, you're gonna be pushing way too much fuel through there. So that is why they make different sizes of main jets to control how much fuel, if you're holding that throttle wide open, how much is coming out of there, or a half throttle, any amount of throttle at all. You wanna make sure that you've got the right size main jet in there. If you got one that's too small, you're gonna be starving that carburetor for fuel, or that motor for fuel. So you wanna make sure that that's not the case either. Your pilot jet, a lot of times if your motorcycle is hard to start and it's a fuel issue, it's because of the pilot jet here. You take this pilot jet, it's a very small screwdriver. You make sure you're completely seated on it before you start to turn this out. But then it's got such a small orifice on this pilot jet, you want to make sure that it's clean and it builds up easily. So you want to take compressed air then. Once you got this pilot jet out, you can take compressed air, blow through it, make sure that you can see through it when you hold it up to light. If you can't see through it, then it needs more cleaning. And what you do then, you get, K&L makes these, or there's other companies that make these, but you take and just choose the right size. And a lot of times on a pilot jet, it is the smallest one you have, or at least you want to start with the smallest one. So we'll find the smallest one here. Yeah, this might not be the smallest one because I was able to get one through there earlier. Here we go, this bent up one's small. It's very small, there's some ribs on there, kind of cleans the debris up. You want to make sure, again, you want to make sure that you can see through that pilot jet. Next, what you're going to do, well, we'll pull this float here and push this through with a small screwdriver or a pick, enough room to get a pair of pliers on there, and you can pull this needle out. Sometimes these can be a bit of a challenge. What you don't want to do is take a hammer and pound on this, even with a pick or something. You want to make sure the post is supported because these are aluminum, these posts here, and they break very easily. So you want to make sure that you're not putting too much pressure on there. We've got the float off of there. You want to make sure, inspect it, make sure there's no holes, make sure there's no damage. These are adjustable floats, so if you've got a little bit of fuel dumping out the bottom of that carburetor, when it's on kind of a kickstand or a center stand or something, you can adjust this slightly. You don't want to adjust it if your needle here just needs replaced. And if it's grooved, if it's worn, if there's any kind of damage here to the seat, then you don't want to just simply adjust your float. You want to be replacing your needle and seat. Your seat is here, your needle is here. Sometimes the kits that you order will have those in there, and they'll just say needle and seat, and that'll include both those parts, and you can replace those. When your fuel is coming in from your fuel tank, what happens is fuel comes in here and will go through your carburetor and come out here. So when your float is up, so your carburetor is sitting like this, okay, when your float is up, it is shutting this needle off, not allowing any more fuel in. If you're constantly having fuel dump out this bottom tab here, which means it's coming out there, that means your bowl is completely full and your fuel tank is consistently trying to dump more fuel in there. If that's the case, you can try adjusting your tab here, depending on what position it is, but if it's in this position, push it down slightly to shut that fuel off sooner. Now also, if your bike's not running good at that point, then maybe you shut it too far and it's not allowing enough fuel to flow through there. So that's kind of a touchy subject, but the main thing is you want to make sure that if there's any wear or damage to this or the needle or the seat, that you want to get that replaced. Next, we've got your air fuel screw here, and that intake is here, so air's flowing this direction through here, and this air fuel screw will allow more air fuel through there, and so this can make a big difference on how your bike is running. So you want to make sure, go off your factory specs, your book, or check a website, or ask me in the comments and I can get those numbers for you. But generally they're between 1.5 turns out to 2.5 turns out. And the way that you figure that is you run this all the way down. So if your bike is running fine, you're just cleaning the carburetor for whatever reason, count how many turns in you are. So half turn, 1.5, 2, about 2.25. So that means when you're cleaning your carburetor, you want to make sure you do the same amount out. So there's a quarter, there's a half, there's 2, there's a half, so that's 2.25 there. So you want to make sure that you get that carburetor or that air fuel screw in the correct position out. It won't, unless you're like 5 screws out, this screw and spring here is not going to work itself out. I'll show you what that looks like. There's kind of a built-in O-ring as well as a spring. So if I'm cleaning it, I always take this out as well just to make sure I can clean and blow through that port as well. So that's what it looks like there. It's got this needle here with the built-in O-ring on it, and then that slides in there. This spring keeps that screw from falling out when you just screw it out a turn or two. So now go all the way in with it. Quarter turn, half, so that's 1.25, 1.75, 2.25. So that's where it needs to be there. Going back together, you want to make sure, again, that you can see through your main jet there. Maybe take a cleaner here, run it through there, make sure that the orifice is cleaned out. Make sure you have your brass washer on there as well, so that's going to set on there. Set that main jet in there. These you want to snug down again. Remember that your carburetor's sitting the other direction, so this is actually the wrong side up right now. So that is, if these jets are not tight on there, then they're going to work themselves loose. But also their brass washers going into aluminum, so you really don't have to crank on it. Your pilot jet there, I like to make sure my screwdriver is completely clean before I stick that down in that hole there and then tighten up. Again, you want to make sure that you're properly seated on there before you start really cranking on it. That way you don't strip that jet out. Take your needle then, set it down in there. You can blow through that port there, and then your float there with your pin running through, push it through, find the right spot, and that'll come up. You want to make sure that this gasket is in good condition. If you've got a rebuild kit for your carburetor, this gasket is going to come in with it. Now we're going to set that on there. We've got your 4 screws here. Put these in, and again, snug them up because they're going to be upside down, but you also don't need to crank on them because that's just going to make it more difficult for the next person. That gasket will seal the carburetor really good if you've got a new one or even a good used one on there. So once I get them all finger tight, then I go through and I tighten them down. I do that in a crisscross pattern, that way you're not torquing that gasket in kind of a weird angle. Smash it on one side, and then when you tighten the other side down, it doesn't smash as good. So now we've got your slide there. Again, generally you'd have your cable hooked up to this already. This slide will only go down one direction. I'll slide it down there. And you want to make sure when you're going down that you're sitting right into that main jet holder there. You can see it's going to go all the way down there. And we've got our idle probably a little high right now just because I was just playing with it. But you want that all the way seated. Next you'll have your keeper, and again, generally you'd have your cable in there, so this would be more of a two-handed job. Set that down in there, right in the groove. You can see possibly how that sits there. Right in its groove. Take that spring then. Make sure that that O-ring is good, that gasket there. Set this right down on top. Again, cable going through it. Tighten this down. It's a fine aluminum thread. You want to make sure you start it out right before you start turning it so that you aren't stripping that. Plunger, make sure you've blown through there. Make sure that's in good condition. That is going to sit just like that. And then again, I'll show you the right-hand carburetor next, and we'll clean that, and you can see where this rod's gonna go there. All right, this is the carburetor on a 1975 Suzuki GT500. Thanks for watching.